Well, welcome to the Tas Farmers Talks podcast. I'm Grayson. I'm the Manager for Communications and Engagement here. It's been another big and busy week. It's all about fuel, fertiliser, and the idea of fair pricing in dairy and perhaps across a few other commodities. But as always, I'd like to go around the room and introduce our guests. Of course, we've got our Vice President, Felicity Richards, Chair of Farm Safe, beef producer, hailing from the lovely island of Flinders. How are you, Felicity?
I'm very well, thank you.
What's happening? Anything exciting?
Oh, I've hit the trifecta. I've got the ageing parents, young children, and trying to manage my business. So I've decided that, that is absolutely a trifecta to be juggling. But I'm sure there's a lot of people thinking, same boat.
Yeah, I'm not going to whinge about that one. And of course, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles had Donatello. He was a man from the Renaissance. We've got our own Neil Gross. About to go away fishing, Neil. What's the story there? Having time off?
Time away more than time off because you can't turn your brain off. So we're heading to Queensland to chase some barramundi, jungle perch, maybe some mac tuna, depending on what's around. But there is a tail end of a cyclone swinging around up there. So
just like being at work.
There's always a cyclone in Tas Farmers, Grayson. Sometimes it brings rain and sometimes it's just hot wind.
Well, there's no segue for me there, but I will introduce Elizabeth Skirthing from Rural Business Tasmania. Elizabeth, you sit on a number of boards. I'd love to list them out, but perhaps Tia is an interesting one. You're a CEO of Rural Business Tasmania. You've worked in perhaps forestry, would I be right? Yep. And pretty extensive resume. I could keep reading it, but is there anything you'd like to summarise or highlight that I've missed?
No, although Longford is my hunting ground from teenage years. I grew up at Cressy and obviously caught the bus into school each morning and spent a lot of time in Longford.
So
You'd be too young to remember the Longford Folk Festival, wouldn't you?
Yes, definitely too young for that. Don't know that I am, but anyway.
Well, talking of wise and wisdom, Neil, the fuel saga just seems to drag on. We're not really getting clarity from the government. Is farming a priority when it comes to perhaps thinking about turning the tap off to a few people? Will it keep flying? Will diesel keep flying? Urea, big problem. But if you were in charge, Neil, and doing all the policy making and setting and running the show, what would your plan be? I know we've spoken about this internally, but perhaps what would you suggest to our friends in politics?
Well, the first part of that plan is outlining what we have and what we know. It's very difficult for anyone to develop a plan without knowledge. One of the key things that we're lacking at the moment is some clarity around future supply of diesel. And when we're talking future, we're talking 6 to 8 weeks. We have to know what is expected to come into Tasmania, in what quantities, and how we're going to cope with that. So if it does come to a point where we're rationing diesel, the sooner you start to ration that diesel, the more you've got to play with, the more you can prioritise. But it's from our members' point of view, it's fundamental to know what's in front of them so they can prioritise in their businesses. There will be things that have to be done now. There will be things that can be put off until the situation's clearer for many of our members in the red meat industry. And Felicity, I'll defer to you for some expertise around that, but also in the dairy industry where you need consistency of supply because you can't just park the cattle in the back paddock and wait for something to get better. You can't not milk your cows. You need to plan for all of that. And high amongst that is, of course, the cash flow agenda. Like the cash needs to flow because the bank need their interest payment. And for some growers that's significant, or some farmers that's significant. I guess our frustration around diesel is that we just cannot get that clear picture as to what the situation is. We've approached government publicly, but also a lot of work behind the scenes, just trying to get a handle on that. And as we sit here this morning or this afternoon, Grayson, we still don't have that clarity.
Everything's coming in at once. we're looking potentially drier weather, the fuel problem, the urea. Is it a case of the system's under pressure, or is it just a cost issue? Is it a case of farmers just have to put the fuel in and process and harvest, or?
Well, farmers, I spent 2 hours this morning with Simplot, along with our growers committee, including senior manager from America who dialed in from Boise, Idaho. Our situation is not unique here. Like, they're facing the same pressures in America, although it's around price, not supply. I mean, they make a lot of their own diesel, which we don't do. They are also constrained when it comes to things like fertiliser and urea. This is going to be going on. Even if the war ended tomorrow, America's war ended tomorrow in the Middle East, the tail that wags this dog is about 6 months long at the best. And as we learnt through COVID, where there were escalations in price caused by a crisis, they didn't go back to pre-COVID levels. So there is a new normal coming out of this. But what that new normal is, it's hard to tell. And what filled me with some degree of pessimism, I'm not a pessimistic person, was our friend from Simplot kept saying that hope is not a strategy, but we're hoping things get better.
Mm. We only have 30-day visibility, really, from what I can tell, in attending some of the fuel meetings.
Because, Tasmania's fuel supplies are just the same as the diesel tank in your four-wheel drive. When it gets to about half empty, you fill it up again. It's not a reserve, it's not a storage, it's just what your vehicle needs for proper operation. So Tasmania relies on consistent diesel supply at least every fortnight.
Is the crunch going to be price? Is there going to be a point in terms of pricing, or is it going to be really the fuel? We'll do anything to harvest, but come fuel not being available, that's the real crunch?
At the moment, price is important, but it's secondary because growers have to get that product out of the ground to get paid. If you think of, and I'm sorry to dwell so much on potato growers, but it's front of mind at the moment, the average cost of growing a hectare of potatoes is $23,000. It's a 20-week crop. If you've got 40 hectares of potatoes in the ground, you've got about $1 million in the overdraft. You don't get paid until that's out of the ground and at Simplot. So they need to get that out of the ground and to Simplot, because if nothing else, they've got to pay the bank manager. And as one of our members said today, if you haven't heard from your bank manager in the last week, it means you're debt-free. So our financial institutions are very worried about where this is heading. Growers are worried about it, Simplot's worried about it, everyone's worried about it. But amongst everything, going back to your original question, Grayson, supply trumps price, because it doesn't matter what it is if you can't get it.
How are we going to ensure ag's protected, Neil?
We have to keep working very hard behind the scenes, like, as a lot of things we do in all our roles in Tas Farmers and other things. You'll achieve far more through diplomatic means in the background, but ultimately there needs every now and again for the public to be aware of what's going on, if nothing else, to prompt some action, which is what happened last week when, despite our best endeavours, we couldn't get any clarity on where diesel was. So we wrote to the Premier, and then we let people know that we'd written to the Premier and this is what we were after. And, and 5 minutes after the letter lands, our President gets a phone call from the Premier. I mean, we shouldn't have to do it like that, but if that's the game we've got to play, we've got to play. But, there's probably better ways to do it than that.
Felicity, what's the reality on farm for a meat producer like yourself? What are you doing? You've got all the tanks full, have you? You're prepared, you're ready?
Look, I think what I keep reminding myself of is, and I'm sure Liz will be able to talk about this more, is we are an exceptional industry for preparing for the unknown. And I kind of feel like drought has been an amazing training ground for crises of this kind. Because you don't know when it's going to end, it's affecting everyone, and somehow we're going to navigate through that. From our point of view, we've obviously gone back, as I'm sure many people have, gone back to the budget and reforecasted. And there's definitely an element of, well, what do we know now? What do we hope is going to happen, and what does it look like? Where's our threshold for things needing to be significantly changed again. So it's kind of like, okay, I'm going to do this, and then if I hit that date and I revisit, I'm going to hit the next tranche of changes to address that pressure. And that's going to look different for everyone. There'll be people for whom their cash flow is servicing loans and interest and all sorts of things that they absolutely need to meet. As Neil was saying, that's kind of the first step for, I'm sure, people who are at the point of harvest. But the next step is, and what do I put in the ground? What animals do I join? What am I doing in terms of the next season? So in a way, while the pressure builds, I think that one of the best things we can all be doing, as I'm sure lots of farmers are, is to sit back and say, okay, what do I know about my business? Are there any gaps where I need to go and gather more information? What information's available to me? And now I'm going to plan that right down, because that's what we have to do. And I'm happy to say I think a lot of farmers are really good at it. And for those who are feeling unsure, there's a lot of resources available to support them. And I'm sure Rural Business Tasmania is one of those, with that kind of support available to people who might be feeling like, I'm not quite where I want to be in preparation.
Yes, I agree completely with you, Felicity. I think those trigger points and knowing that no decision is still a decision is something that everybody has to be really careful of, that you can't just hope that it's going to go away. This is going to have an impact. It's going to need change in your business circumstances. You need to be aware of the financial decisions that need to be looked at, and you need to have those trigger points in your mind. So that is, how much fuel you've got on farm, what your supply is, what your fertiliser needs are, where they're coming from, is the ship going to arrive? It's not just agriculture and tractors that need diesel, it's the shipping line.
The transport,
talking with the Simplot guys, it's not just getting the potatoes out of the ground, it's actually processing them, then getting them to the McDonald's when they become chips. It's very integral, and that whole supply chain is affected. And that's probably where it's slightly different from drought. We're very good at preparing for drought, but that's more about what we're dealing with as farmers. It's not about the whole of the community being involved. And I think that is really going to be something that we have to be aware of. Some of the reports coming out of the mainland about, the raids of fuel of a night time, those sort of things. It's something that is quite different than what we've seen just with drought.
A lot of differences, and cash flow is probably the other one we've sort of heard a little bit about from a variety of different stakeholders. Broadly, in terms of cash flow, what do you think farmers should be thinking about?
They need to, one, make sure that they've got a really good relationship with their bank manager, and make sure that they're actually keeping in contact with that manager. If they haven't got a good relationship, or they're not sure which way to go, our business advisors, a lot of them are past business rural bank managers and have got banking experience. So they know how to put the documentation together to get the tick for the bank manager, to look at, if there's some seasonal finance that's needed, to look at what rationalisation they might need to do from an asset point of view, to see where that might be sitting, to look at what their reserves are. Similar to, drought, we look at the feed reserves. This is just a different commodity that we're looking at in fuel and fertiliser. And we also need to, from the horticulture side of it, look at the other petroleum products, your plastics, your polypipes. They're all going up in price if you can get them. So we need to look at everything in that supply chain, see what's important to your farm, go through that resourcing, including the cash resourcing, to make sure that you've got an idea of what that demand period is going to look like. Where are your peak demands that you're going to need the cash to buy the fuel and fertiliser? Mm-hmm. What happens if you're actually holding it and something happens to it? So you might be your fuel's compromised by water or something. How do you actually backfill that? Have you got those reserves in place? So it's really important to make sure that there's regular trigger points of when you look at that, and to make sure that you've actually got that understanding in your head and also on paper for your bank manager and any other suppliers that you know.
So even if you're not making a decision, at least you're across those and you understand your trigger points when you might make a different decision. Neil, you've been writing probably a pretty good plan, talking to government. The idea of, say, a COVID-style deferral loan, which was something thrown around during COVID quite extensively, is this a good idea?
Well, it worked during COVID. So back during COVID, which it seems like a million years ago, but it was really only 6 years ago. And I think we're all still scarred by that. At the time, I was CEO of the Launceston Chamber of Commerce, and in the absence of a number of other membership organisations who disappeared, we basically ran a lot of what was going on. And that deferral of loans was a really key plank for small business during COVID. Like, a lot of businesses around Launceston used it. My understanding is not a lot of rural businesses used it because they'd just come out of drought. They were in a reasonable position. But this time, I think it's probably going to be different, because whereas at COVID you could still farm, you could still do a lot of things, not having enough diesel and having high-priced diesel is different than a drought or a storm. You know when a drought's coming, you sense that it's coming. It's a long time coming, but you know when it's here. You know when a flood's coming, you know what to do. I don't think there would be any farmers who would know what to do when diesel is constrained. What do we actually do? Where's the playbook for this? So there will be pressures on cash flow. There will be pressures on all sorts of things. So if that option is reignited, if you like, and I think the legislation still sits there from COVID, if the banking regulators can make it possible, if the Australian Banking Association on behalf of the big banks can facilitate that, then that is absolutely something that should be done. I mean, it should be done nationally, but I think here in Tasmania we are particularly exposed. Like, we are 2% of the national market. We are at the tail end of all supply chains. A lot of our diesel, we do get the odd shipment direct from Malaysia or South Korea or Japan or Singapore, but mostly it comes from Botany Bay, it comes from Sydney. So it relies on there being enough left in their tank to come down here. So we are exposed, particularly, and also around urea and those things. So if we do get to the point in September where there's no fertiliser and farmers just go, well, we can't grow because we can't get the yield, then there needs to be some assistance to help them transition through what will be a fairly seismic change, particularly for croppers and for dairy farmers losing productivity, particularly for red meat, intensive red meat and so on. There needs to be that break, not a government handout, but just an assistance. And during that time, interest wasn't deferred. Well, it was, you didn't have to pay it, but you could capitalise it. So it was still accrued, but it was capitalised, and you didn't have that pressure of, okay, for the next 6 months I've got to make all these payments. And the thing about it is it's voluntary. It doesn't have any impact at all on government budgets. It's just between you and the bank. And if you say to the bank, I need help with this and this is what I'd like to do, then the bank goes, yep, we can do that. We'll review in 6 months. There's plenty of professional help, and whenever we see Elizabeth walk into the room, we feel a high degree of comfort that someone who knows actually what they're talking about in and around this is with us. So, RBT have that expertise. There's all that help through Rural Alive and Well and all those other things. We just need that other third prong, which is the financial institutions to come on board.
So good idea, bad idea, Elizabeth, some sort of scheme like that?
I think it's really good if the banks can provide that, interest only or whatever safeguards and concessions to allow that long-term viability and to actually work through that. It is something that is quite unusual. Obviously, the banks can provide, low interest loans, and I know, Minister Collins did just recently. That is also an option, but it takes the actual financial institutions working together with their farmers to make sure that whatever they can put in place, it will be for the long term, and that the banks are able to support the short term to get us through this.
We've seen some other targeted measures, as you mentioned there, Elizabeth, but in terms of removing the fuel excise, it wasn't very targeted. we should be asking for targeted support for agriculture. Neil, any thoughts on what's going on politically? Why has there not really been some leaders out there saying ag should be supported and this is what government's going to do?
That's really hard to understand. Like we've got some really strong agricultural leaders, particularly in this state, and we've had a lot of conversations with Minister Gavin Pearce, who is well and truly across this and working flat out in the background, trying to do as much as he can around fertiliser and all the other things. When we look nationally, we see a lot of tinkering around the edges. I'm not sure spending $20 million on telling people to pump their tyres up and take their roof racks off.
You've stolen my thunder.
Oh, sorry.
I wanted to rant about that one. Keep going.
That could be a whole long subject just on itself.
I mean, and the other thing is, there's a lot of signals here which tell us that there's a lot of people who don't really know how to deal with this situation. They know what they want to do. They know why they want to do it. They don't know how to deal with it. Even for the average person in Tasmania to go to the emergency website to find out fuel levels in this state just sends a massive message which says there's an emergency coming, but that's not backed up with the planning rhetoric by government who say, it's all right, supply's coming, it's fine, don't worry about it.
Was that 17 days worth of fuel last I looked? Does that sound about right?
Yeah, the fuelsupply.au I think was the website we've been looking at a little bit. So 17 days worth of diesel in Australia. That's on island. On island, the big island in Australia. There is other coming. It's good that the federal government have taken a lead and spoken with Singapore and Japan and Malaysia and South Korea about fuel supply coming in. It tends to ignore the fact that there's not enough crude oil going into those refineries to produce the diesel coming out the other way. Our crude oil supply, as I understand it, our reserve is based in Texas. Texas, USA, not Texas, Western Australia, if there is such a place. That in itself raises some alarm bells. We've given up and we've spoken about this before, we've given up our sovereign capability to make liquid fuel. I think Australians and agriculture in particular would be very comfortable if all of a sudden the government, state and federal, started thinking about, okay, how do we use this crisis to build our capability again? Yes, there is a need to transition away from fossil fuels into other alternative methods of energy, and I spend a lot of time working in that field. It's how you get the transition right, and you can't transition overnight, as we're seeing. There are so many of Australia's natural assets which we don't make the most of. Like, Australia has huge resources of natural gas. It's not a particularly complicated processing way to make diesel out of natural gas.
Well, there's another political topic, but let's jump back to the real issue.
There is a big gas pipeline coming under Bass Strait. Anyway.
Yeah, there's that too. $20 million. Felicity, you count the numbers, you spend wisely. I note that your car has well and truly got very good tyres that have air in them, no roof racks. Do we need to spend $20 million to tell people just to drive a bit differently, or have I missed the point?
Weird. There is a silver lining, and that is that the internet is generating the most hilarious takes of that advertising campaign that you can alleviate all your distress for at least 30 minutes while you just enjoy the comedians Australia-wide taking the mickey.
Jimmy Giggle is all over it.
Oh, it's fantastic. Look, I understand messaging to people that they need to take this seriously. Whether I put a $20 million campaign price tag on that, it's an unusual decision, put it that way, and that's coming from someone who's worked with a lot of not-for-profits that hanker for $500,000 for 3 years kind of thing. So it does rather sting when you see that kind of money going into campaigns. But it's really funny. When I think about Tas farmers and I think about the advocacy piece for protecting agriculture through a crisis like this, I think messaging about farming and the impact this crisis is having on farming is something we need to do. Because I think people don't see it. They don't realise what it looks like for a farmer if you can't put fuel in your tractor or your harvester. And so that's where I think reaching out to our consumers and saying agriculture doesn't just happen in your supermarket. The elves and the fairies don't come every night and repopulate the shelves with your favourite products. So where we can be shining a light on how this crisis is impacting our industry, I think it's going to position us more strongly for the public to understand why agriculture needs to be protected and supported through this crisis. Because I don't think a lot of people understand.
I think you've hit the nail on the head, and don't quote me on where I heard this, but I actually heard a comment that we don't need farmers because we've got supermarkets with food in it.
Wow.
I haven't been able to authenticate that, but just the fact that it's been, verbalised is scary.
I've seen an internet meme attributing that to the Greens, and I know the Greens are a lot of things, but they're surely not that stupid.
No, I don't think we could possibly claim that, surely.
But, it does signify that people don't understand the supply chain. They don't understand that they should have learnt by COVID. We ran out of chips and potatoes in COVID. It's likely to happen again if we can't get the potatoes out of the ground. We can't get them to the processing factory. We can't get the processors to actually do it, and then we can't ship it to the McDonald's factory, supply chain. How do we actually get that sort of message? And it would have been nice to see more of the strategic messaging about the whole of crisis rather than just one little aspect, which is the fuel, which is the immediate concern. It's not just about fuel, it's about the whole supply chain, and we're actually fighting the rest of the world for a limited supply at the moment.
You are absolutely correct. Australians aren't stupid.
No.
Far from it. They're probably the most socially and community aware population on the planet. If you look, if we compare other countries to how, community aware and socially aware Australia are, we'd be right up the top. Australians are very capable of digesting messages around what needs to happen. After all, every adult Australian goes to an election once every 3 years for a federal government, every 4 years for a state government, far too often for local government. So, we do understand that they can get across complex issues. So why can't we just say to the Australian people, this is where we're at, this is where we potentially could be. If we get to that point, this is what we need to do. If we don't get to that point, then it's fine, it's business as usual. But Australians need to be prepared that if diesel supply becomes constrained in Australia, food security and food supply is paramount, and that's what we need to do. And we will be moving food from farms into supermarkets so you can buy it, at the same time protecting our emergency services and everything else we need to do. And the amount of diesel and fuel you need for the emergency services is just, as we all know, is basically a rounding error compared to what gets consumed in agriculture. Mm. So that's a very simple, clear message, and Australians will go, yeah, right, I'll get that. Okay, so if this happens, this is what's going to happen after that. You say to your kids all the time, if you do this, you're going to get that.
Yeah, consequences.
Consequences. Actions and consequences.
I think that's what the Australian public is actually begging for. They want to know what's coming, what are the rules going to be? Can I go and fill up my can to mow the lawns on Saturday, or am I going to get harassed by people who want to film me and put me on social media for it?
Yeah, well, I remember my in-laws used to have a holiday place in the Mornington Peninsula, and there was a drought, and lots of houses down there had bores, so they were watering their gardens with bores. So you basically had to put a sign out the front saying only using bore water. So all the people in the district didn't come around saying you're using our drinking water to water your bloody roses.
Just some basic rules and what they might look like if there is a trigger point to be understood.
I think that's something that we all grow up, well, most of us grow up with, in our family situation. From the time you're born, there's boundaries.
Yeah.
Yes, we push those boundaries and sometimes get away with getting over them. But if there are bigger boundaries that allow us to cope for that longer period and have that business continuity, living continuity plan, that's going to be so much better than getting to a COVID situation where we're all locked up and we can't go anywhere because there's no fuel, and unless you've got a bike or a pony, you're stuck.
Mm. And if we go back to COVID, every day during COVID, Peter Gutwin, our Premier, was on the TV saying, this is what's happening, this is our plan, this is what we'll do if X happens, this will do with Y happens, this is the behaviour we want you to do. And everyone,
generally followed it.
generally followed it, and and I mean, people agreed with it because of the election following, even though he was saying the worst of news, people may die, you cannot move, you can't do all these things. He got 3 quotas in his own right the next election because he told people what was going on. He was clear and he showed absolute leadership. Now, what haven't we learnt from that?
There's a lot to be learned from COVID still. But without diesel just isn't optional. If supply tightens, as we're saying, production doesn't just slow down, it stops. And the other thing that's going to slow down and stop production is this idea of fertiliser. And yesterday, the minister, when asked about fuel, jumped right onto the idea of fertiliser as being part of that fuel mixture. Neil, what might be the minister thinking? Why is he jumping to fertiliser? What's your take on that?
Oh, the minister's jumping to fertiliser, and quite rightly so, because he knows the critical nature of getting stuff out of the ground, but he knows the fundamental nature of planting new stuff. Like, farms are based on rotating crops of multiple types, and it doesn't matter what you're putting in the ground, whether it's grass for cattle to eat, whether it's seed grains, potatoes, carrots, broccoli, it doesn't matter. You need that extra fertiliser. That is the industrial nature of modern agriculture. So if you ensure the flow of fertiliser and the right type of fertiliser, you are ensuring the success of the next generation of crops the next season. So Minister Pearce has been so proactive in this, and he and I spoke on the phone the other night about all the work he's doing in the background, talking with fertiliser companies, talking with anyone who listen to secure those supplies for Tasmania. So he's just got on the front foot. He hasn't left it to bureaucrats or public servants to do it. He's gone, well, I'm the minister, this is my responsibility. I've got these contacts. I'm going to ring up the Chief Executive Officer of Pivot and say, we need this. And if we can't have this, what else can we have? So, we were talking about, accessing different types of nitrogen-based fertiliser, but the need to run extension programs to help farmers understand how to best use it. And he said, well, can Tas farmers help with that? Well, of course we can. It's our bread and butter, We're an advocacy organisation, but we also want to do everything we can to help farmers farm better. So he's absolutely right to put it front and centre. And I guess the question that was asked in Parliament the other day was about diesel, but you asked it of the Ag Minister, who's going to talk about agriculture. And as a good friend of mine says, it's called question time, not answer time, so you get whatever answer you're getting. So, perhaps it was a misdirected question. The question itself was quite valid and a strong one, and it absolutely demands the right answer. But Minister Pearce, he spoke to all those farmers who are hanging out for fertiliser security as well.
I was talking to Matt Young, I think it was, from the Northwest, and he was saying one of the options might be spraying liquid nitrogen. Is that one of the potential options?
Yeah.
Are there other options government might be looking at?
It is, and there is a lot of liquid nitrogen used in Tasmania. We are probably constrained by how much of it we can keep here. So there's a lot of work to be done, and as I said a little bit earlier, don't waste a good crisis. If there's a way to pivot to which makes us more resilient on island, then we should do that. I mean, I was talking to a research scientist the other day who's developed a method of extracting phosphorus and nitrogen from sewage, from human waste, and it's available in his pilot program basically as a liquid which you just pipe it into your pivot and spray it. And he's using new technology, new Tasmanian-based technology, reducing, getting the two fundamental elements out of what's already there. In many ways the answer's right under our feet.
And this is, if I could jump in there, Grayson, I think, again, we have to take heart from just how incredibly creative people are and the extraordinary things that come through crises. Like, this is hardly extraordinary, but I do think the way the attitude towards working from home changed during COVID, I think shaped overall society for the better. There's far more understanding and compassion, I think, towards people balancing the pressures of home and family life with work. And that was a really great outcome. In this particular situation, when we look at fertiliser, again, it comes back so much to that planning piece and really understanding. And I think possibly I suspect a lot of people not involved with agriculture don't realise that not only does failing to put the fertiliser on compromise your ability to grow what you want to grow, but you also are effectively mining your soil. So you still if you continue to take whether it's livestock or crops off and you're not replenishing anything, you have got sooner or later you're going to have to deal with the consequences of that. And farmers are acutely aware of that, but I suspect a lot of people potentially are not aware that you can't just go a year without fertiliser and say, well, job's done. And where we look at our planning around that, we know that farmers, I hope many of them are taking that opportunity to check in with their agronomist. Again, never feel like you're going this alone. There's a lot of people with a lot of expertise out there who can talk to you about blends and rates and even your crop choices, your grass choices that you might not ordinarily make, but they are potentially appropriate for your business in this time of uncertainty. So again, I'd just be saying to everyone, lean hard into that expertise and don't feel like you're going it alone, because there is a lot of information and support out there for you to make decisions based on what your business can actually cope with and what's available to you.
And farmers are probably paying for a lot of that too through their levies. And, as you know, I know with potato growers, there's a lot of agronomists and field officers out there who are funded through Simplot. So, use them. They need something to do.
I think the other thing with that, crisis always has something back to give back, is what can we do? And at the Tas Institute of Ag board meeting last week, we were talking about different forms of nitrogen and what opportunities come out of where we're seeing this to look at, what other forms of fertiliser and looking at soil health. And there's a lot of projects around at the moment about soil health. So how can we do things differently and get that widespread application as an opportunity for us to be leading the world with agriculture, and how we actually keep that sustainable and have it so that we've got the resources in the state.
Yeah, ag just seems to continue to adapt quite amazingly, as you said, Felicity. And then you mentioned compassion before, Felicity. The word sticks out because as of June, milk prices are going to be announced, and I believe, Neil, with one of the processors has said we'll give some money back in terms of milk solids.
That's exactly right. That's Lactalis, although I heard it pronounced on the ABC this morning as Lactalis. The emphasis was on the different syllable. But the principle is absolutely strong, and a number of our members have been doing a lot of work in the background with Lactalis around the need for price to increase. So that's going up by about 7 or 8%. So in rough terms, that's an extra 5 cents per litre of milk back to the dairy farmer. That starts beginning of May, and that is in direct response to the high cost of diesel.
Andrew Aldridge was actually on the radio today and talking about this very topic, and he said that perhaps it's not being shared evenly. It's good for one to come out, but should be more be jumping onto the opportunity to actually help farmers out. And
absolutely,
be a good corporate citizen.
Oh, 100%. And I mean, the dairy industry is competitive. Dairy farmers do move between processors when they get a better deal. There is, different ways of helping farmers out when it comes to the diesel cost. We've put a proposal to McCain's around transport support, but based on a kilometre travel to the factory rather than on the per tonne. That way that those who are incurring the most cost get the most benefit from that. So there's lots of different ways of doing it. The key principle is that our major agricultural companies that benefit from Tasmanian agriculture, this is a time to put back. Because if there was ever a time our farmers needed help in a big way, in a tangible way, it's with the cost of diesel. Like, everything a farmer does is impacted by that cost. As soon as they're out of bed in the morning, doesn't matter what they do, everything has a cost attributable to the price of diesel attached to it.
Well, amen, can I say?
Sorry.
But how often we do see these guys who simply can set the price for our farmers. They're the price takers for the city. But what does it mean to be a price taker in this really volatile environment?
You know, it's funny. I actually think overall it just compounds a real sense of vulnerability. And that is definitely not the technical answer that I'm sure Neil would give.
No, that's bang on, I reckon.
But it's, and that in itself is really it's difficult to get up every morning and run your business with that kind of vulnerability in the back of your mind, especially when you couple it with all the other environmental factors that farmers work with.
It means that instead of, like a freight person being able to put on a surcharge for the fuel, or the coffee maker putting on a surcharge because things have gone up, farmers don't get that opportunity. And
to the contrary, I'm watching them come in. Email after email after email.
And it's really disheartening that we as the farming community don't have that ability to make our own decisions in that. It depends on people like Neil being able to make those price negotiations, account for those, and then for good corporate support that's decided by someone that might not even be in Tasmania or Australia. So how do we actually recognise that we haven't got control and the only thing we can control are the costs, which at the moment are spiralling? And that's a really hard issue to deal with. But look at the alternative of not having a contract to supply the product at a set price, and all of a sudden you've got something that's in a free market point of view that perhaps no one will buy because they've got other costs. So you have to weigh that up and perhaps look, well, at least you've got a supply for, all those potatoes that are sitting in the ground that has cost you a lot of money. At least you've got a guaranteed payment there, but it's how you actually deal with that without taking all those extra costs into place.
That vulnerability, we're actually talking around that with the committee this morning before we met with Simplot, and how all young farmers are feeling really vulnerable at the moment. They're sitting there questioning, why am I doing this? They're seeing their mates who are tradies putting on a diesel surcharge and heading off to work at 7 a.m. and getting home at 4 o'clock in the afternoon and having all their weekends free. Yet our young farmers are under intense financial pressure. They're under intense productivity pressure, particularly in a season like this, which was late to start, slow to get going and quick to finish. Yields are down, cash flow's down, pressure's up, interest rates are up, and they're looking at their parents and their partners and going, what are we doing this for?
And it's really, I was really glad when you mentioned earlier resources like raw. I think we actually have to remember at these times, it's really critical we actually take care of ourselves and look after ourselves and do what we can to acknowledge and alleviate that pressure. I am aware, interestingly, of some research that I can't quote where it came from, so the least reliable kind. But it was some fascinating
it was TikTok,
study that
right?
it was research.
Solid research-based place that for information.
It's came from Truth Social, didn't it?
Truth Social. It was I'll just give people enough information that they can Google it and correct me later. I think it was research based in the US, and it was looking at people in a harvesting scenario. So you put all your investment into getting your crop ready, and then they actually did IQ tests on people at that peak financial pressure point, and then they did it again when they'd received payment. And I would have thought that an IQ test was static, that your brain is your brain is your brain. They found it's not. People were physically not capable of making the same kind of decision-making when they were under that financial pressure. And I think we've really got to be aware of that we might wake up and think, no, I've got it. But this is a really good time to talk to RBT or to talk to your accountant and say, look, I just want you to check my decision-making here because I'm under a lot of pressure and there might be things that are clouding my judgment in a way that I'm simply not even able to see now. So, it's probably a bit of putting my farm safe hat on in a way that you almost have to guard against yourself and reach out even if you maybe don't think you need to, just because it doesn't hurt to get an objective set of eyes over your plan. And a little bit of feedback from someone who's not feeling the pinch the way you are.
Farm safety is not just physical safety.
Not at all. No.
That decision making, obviously the last 20 years, providing the rural financial counselling service, which is people in financial hardship. One of the key things that I have to regularly let my board know, is that they think differently. And I can remember being on radio when the Regional Investment Corporation loans first came out, and I'm trying to convince people that by investing in something for a 5-year period with low interest loans might get them, $50,000 back. They don't think at that level, and that is something that we've seen throughout. It's that decision making becomes a hand to mouth scenario, not a looking at the big picture, and that's what we need to be aware
Where's
of.
my business going to be in 3 years?
Yeah,
I've got to actually think about what 3 years looks like, not 3 months.
That's a really interesting topic, and I'm going to segue here, Grayson, so I do apologise.
No, go. Segue away. It's my favourite form of transport.
But one of the things we spoke about in our pre-meeting before we went to Simplot and then spoke to them about afterwards was we really need to understand where the potato growing industry is going to be in 5 years' time and 10 years' time. And we put it in very, very blunt terms to Simplot that we really need to know what their view of the industry is in 5 years' time. Is it dominated by cheap imports where we're having to compete with excess production in Europe, in Belgium, Netherlands and Germany? Is it going to be a continual push down on price? Is there a race to the bottom? Because if it's going to be like that, we need to know now. This can't be the death of 1,000 cuts because people just can't bear that. They need to be able to make straight up decisions and say, right, well, Simplot feel that in 5 years' time, the price per tonne of potatoes is going to be X. And, we want growers to look at that and go, yeah, I can make $1 out of that, or no, I can't, but make a decision now.
For everyone still listening though, and let's be really
What are you trying to say?
Everyone's
clear enough. Well, we've had some really good chatter. Well, there's two of us listening and one of us might have dropped off.
The Tasfarmer's cure for insomnia.
I haven't tried that when we've had sleepless nights thinking about, what
to do. Jump onto the Test Farmer Talks podcast. How tight are margins? Let's be brutally honest. Everyone out there's thinking about how bad things are for them, but you talked about Felicity, the stress and the pain. Just
If you
are they tight? They're tight.
But it's where they're going to go. So if you think about the average rolling production volume for potatoes is 59 tonnes per hectare. The average cost to produce those 59 tonnes per hectare is $23,000 a tonne. Gross margin based on the last negotiation is about $5,500 a hectare, dropped back from $8,000. If the cost of growing potatoes as it sits at the moment goes to $30,000 a hectare, and your return on that is only, your gross margin is say $4,500 a hectare, no way known is anyone going to say that's a good risk, because it only takes a bad season and it'd only take a fairly half-smart bank manager to go, I'm not going to extend your overdraft by over $1 million to potentially bring in literally 10% of what you've invested. Why would you do that?
And also remembering that the gross margin doesn't account for all of your overheads and living expenses that are also going up.
It's just the cost of production, and it's all based on average. You can have a below average year where you might only get 40 tonnes of spuds to the hectare, and you've gone out backwards big time.
It is, everything's getting sharp. Elizabeth, we've talked a little bit about the planning. Right now, you're talking to a farmer. What does it look like if you give us a quick list? What should they be thinking?
So the first thing is to understand your business and your financial position at this time in a realistic point of view. And so many of our farmers need to make sure that they've got relevant data, not tax data. And I think that's the first place to start. Make sure that your financials and what you're actually looking at are from a management decision making, not from a tax decision making. Once you've got that, to look at the big picture, what debts have you got coming in? If you've got labour, making sure that you've got your super covered, all of your tax, or make decisions to actually be proactive and talk to the tax office to get some plans in place so that you haven't those things that you can control, and particularly in the costs, the things that you can defer or the things that you can mitigate and live without. Try and actually look at those first. Try and see where those gaps are, where those little pressure points are that you can actually find a little bit of breathing space to get you to the next stage. The next stage is then looking at the next 3 months. What's your peak demand? Does your bank understand where you're at? As we know, we're in the middle of harvest for most of our crops. So a lot of people, it's planning time, it's budgeting for the next financial year. The banks will be wanting that information. Use the information you're collating, not just for the banks, but for you to make those decisions and ensure that you have got everything that you need to make the proper decision.
So farmers on the ground are going to think, should I hold steady, scale back, or push through? Where does the line of advice go there?
It will depend on each individual situation. You can't listen to your neighbour and say, I'll follow them. Following them and following the lead isn't the place to be. Only you know your unique situation. If you've got an agronomist coming in, you've got a service provider coming in, they're not going to know the full situation. We find with some of our advisors, they'll go out on farm, sit at the farm table. It might take 3 sessions before you actually get all of that information. There might be a credit card that has been forgotten about. It's a personal one. It's still part of the picture. So the more that you can put that full picture in play to understand the situation as the first step, the more that's the important part. Make sure you have everything that you've got. And don't just follow the lead. Listen to your own gut and get all of that information, but you need to own the decision that you're making and the plan that's going forward.
So you've got a strong team. They've got some really good financial backgrounds and a number of other skills. But how do we get in contact with your team?
So website 1300 88 Farm. We're out and about. We'll come to you. We're on the road. We're paying the fuel.
Don't meet you at the front gate with a jerry can.
No. Probably won't bring extra fuel, but we can still get there. And I think the thing to actually understand is our advisors, they're not going to tell you what to do. They're going to work through those options. They're going to hold your hand to see what's best for you and what your goals are for the short term and then for the longer term. So reach out. We'll also work with your agronomist, with your accountant. It won't be in just an isolated one. We want to actually work and provide that and build that relationship. So it might be that, you don't know your bank manager or they have changed and you're quite sure, haven't seen them for 18 months, all of a sudden you need to renegotiate stuff. You want an interest-only loan for a period. Utilise our guys. They work with the bank managers. They know them all. They socialise with them all. They speak the same language. Get them to help to actually get you to that step, to know where the bits and pieces are. There are available resources and options. There's social services from Australia point of view. There is a farm household allowance that's available that our guys can help you navigate to get. It's got different and complex income and asset, but we can get there and look at that as if that's an option. There might be something else that can be done. Low interest loans. There's a plethora of different levers that can be pushed if we need them.
When should the light globe really come on? If you're out there pottering away and you think, what might really say, well, actually it's time to contact the team?
I think the next rainy day or the next evening after you've put the kids to bed that you finally look at the paperwork, and I know how my brother loves paperwork and financial bookwork, so we're all a bit the same unless you're an accountant like me that loves it. But to look at it sooner rather than later, to get that advice and that support sooner rather than later. It's never too early to pick up the phone and ask for support. It could be that, just that trigger of picking up the phone and having that conversation will allow you that planning and that openness to start thinking again about what that longer term looks like.
Sound advice. Well, I think that wraps up a pretty broad podcast, very, very informative. So thank you, Elizabeth, for coming along. Thank you, Felicity. And Neil, as always, it's good to have the Brain Trust in the room.
Where?
So just to wrap up, as always, though, and going around the room, I know the EU deal certainly is keeping me awake and what that's going to mean for imported veggies, particularly frozen ones. But my life's not that interesting, apparently. Felicity, what's keeping you up at night at the moment?
So I have to put my farm safe hat on because I'm always really conscious of what's happening in that space. And for me, it is our farmers under pressure and what that can then do about our decision making. And we've seen a number of fatalities so far this year in our leading agents, which is our tractors, our side-by-sides and our quads. So my call out to people is protect yourselves. The last thing you want to do at this point to yourselves, to your community and to your loved ones is to put them through the results of an injury or worse. So remember to take care of yourselves, whack the daggy helmet on, put the seatbelt on, let people tease you for being a safety nerd because at least you'll be alive.
Don't rush. Neil, you look tired. What's keeping you up at night?
Well, it's interesting. There's a lot of stuff which is quite pessimistic. But I woke up this morning and I'm sitting there thinking, you know what? We actually do live in an amazing agricultural state. So when you think about all the positive things about Tasmania, we've got some of the best red soils, we've got some of the smartest farmers, we've got some industries which are here for the long term. We grow the best red meat, we've got the best dairy, we grow the best cheese, we've got the best wine. There are some headwinds at the moment, and maybe that light at the end of the tunnel is half a train coming back the other way. But on the other side of that tunnel, there is still a really long track which heads off into a really, really bright future. And, you look at farm values, like in terms of land values, continues to increase. That means there is overwhelming confidence in the future of Tasmanian farming. And at the moment, it's really easy to find the crap. But man, there's a lot of positives around. We hold 27% of Australia's water with 1% of the landmass. We do have avenues to market which are good. Yeah, we've got Bass Strait, but Bass Strait keeps a lot out as well. We've got a really strong system of government which really does, and I mean, as much as we'd always like government to do more with agriculture, they go all right. And and I think at the moment we're probably blessed with one of the best agriculture ministers we've had for some time in terms of understanding strategy, but also understanding farmers, understanding that stuff needs to grow in the dirt and things needs to happen. So, so that's what kept me awake at night, because I was lying there thinking, you know what, yeah, there is a bloody things on the horizon like diesel and fertiliser, and yeah, it's crap, but man, there's some good stuff too. Like, we live in the best place in the world, and if we're going to have a problem, then let's have it in Tasmania rather than anywhere else.
Yeah.
Elizabeth, I know you don't sleep much because you're ringing me after hours to come on the podcast. What's keeping you up at night?
Well, I've been reading a book and it's set in the 1918 period, so war, and looking at, and I know it's not World War, and there's a lot of that has changed in a century, but we look at what rationing and what everyone had to do and the community spirit and how they all got on and did that, and the opportunity for us in Tasmania that we actually do care about our neighbour, that we do come together as small communities. And I think that's something that we can be really proud of. So how do we do that in a way that will support agriculture and our rural communities through this crisis that we're going through?
Well, you've lifted the intellectual bar.
Yeah, reading books. Who would have thought?
I feel a little bit lazy now.
I love my books. I have stacks of them, and I keep some of the book libraries, and people are filled with books when I hand them on.
So how many books do you read at a time? How many books you got going at the same time?
No, I only read one at a time, but I'll probably get through 3 or 4 books a week.
Yeah, right.
As part of book club coming up.
I love
a good book.
Generally have about 4 books going on at one time, so I'll go to bed and I think, yeah, I'm not in that mood tonight, but I'm in a historical mood, or I'm in a want to just have a laugh mood, or I want to read about fishing, which is probably 6 nights out of 7.
You won't find any fishing books in my stack, but my partners will.
Got a soon-to-be-released book authored by Neil Gross coming up soon, so
might be the next present for Roger, because he's already got one.
Called True Confessions of a Tasmanian Fly Fishing Guide.
Well, on that promotional sales note, this is not the ABC. Get your products in now. That's a good segue, actually. Thanks to our partners at TasBuilt, WFI. Anyone else I should really? Telstra, our wonderful friends at Telstra. If your name wasn't mentioned, you better contact the office. And thank you all. Thanks for your time.
And can I just thank all our many, many, many members who contribute through councils and committees and through other advice. Your efforts are priceless on behalf of other farmers.
Again, thank you, Neil. Amen. Have a good day.